series about adventurers guilds and adventurers going on quests, and how can we better plan our adventures. Where are we going? What kind of weapons, armors, tools we need. So in this video we'll talk about what kind of equipment we might need going on an adventure. Of course, if it's an adventure, we're going to fight, slay, and defeat our enemies. So it's quite different from going into battle that a lot of historical manuals and stories are about. It has its own limitations, its own needs, and you might think about adventure similarly. So are you going into the woods or into the swamps? What kind of environment is going to be there? What kind of enemies are you facing? What kind of weapons, armors, and tools your opponents have? That need to be considered, because each weapon is designed for a specific time period, specific need, and specific environment. So let's say you're going into the dungeon, your classical adventure stories, Dungeons and Dragons. So of course dragons wouldn't fit in a dungeon. It's a small space, and its benefit as a dragon is to have wings and fly about and have a large space to move around. So dungeons will not be beneficial space for a dragon. But let's say you're going into one. What would you need? Of course, you will need your primary weapon. Depends on where you're going, what kind of opponents you face. But your primary weapon should be a mix of close range, long range, and side weapon. This is the best equipment you might have. Of course, your typical long-range weapon might be something like a bow and arrow, but again, when you're in a tight spot such as this, you might not have enough space to actually comfortably move around, and not a lot of space. You might shoot bow and arrow. So something like a recurve bow or a smaller bow and arrow might be beneficial, or going with a classical crossbow. So crossbow might be a better weapon to use in a small place when you don't have enough space to draw your bow behind, and you might need something to as a ranged weapon to defend yourself. But this is a big crossbow, heavy crossbow. You might even go with a smaller. This isn't a crossbow, this is a miniature ballista, but similar sized crossbow also might be beneficial. If it's a dungeon, if it has a lot of rooms and locked spaces, you don't need weapons that go really far away. You might just need a short crossbow or a bow that can cover the distance. Maybe you're not a ranged weapon wielder. Again, as I mentioned before, spears are one of the best weapons for self-defense, especially in the tight spaces, like where you have smaller roofs and smaller tight spaces. As I mentioned before, stabbing and piercing weapons are the best, that you don't need to swing. So this is a ancient historical relic. I'm not gonna play around with it. Let's use this one, for example. This is the best type of weapon you might have in such a scenario as an adventurer. Something that you can take apart and put back together. Something like this might be difficult to, we're hitting our corners, it's a difficult thing to use, especially this is like 3-meter tall roof. Imagine you're in a smaller dungeon with smaller spaces. So again, as you saw, you could take this type of weapon apart. This is no weapon, this is and use it as a individual part. So this type of tools might be more beneficial as a primary weapon, something that you can take apart and put back together. Okay, primary weapons, the typical adventuring weapon is again sword, but as you mentioned, swinging around a sword might actually hit the roof, might get stuck in the small crevices and corners trying to swing your weapon and being unable to properly wield it. That is actually respect to Goblin Slayer. That is the first point they picked up on. Someone was trying to swing a sword against a goblin, a weaker opponent, but it hit the roof and he wasn't able to properly defend himself. So again, a sword might not be a good weapon in this scenario. A short sword, something like this, might actually be really beneficial, because you can use it as a stabbing weapon. And it's small enough so you can easily control how large you use it. It's usually measured by how big your arm is and few centimeters more to it. So Again, as I mentioned, something like an axe might be a great weapon for a big guy like me, but swinging it around, this is a weapon that you need to swing to create momentum and kill your opponents. But if you're not careful or if you're wielding it from a lower angle, again, not a great weapon to wield in tight spaces. So, other than primary weapons that you're wielding, you need side weapons, such as this, for example. This is a maybe 3,000 or 2,500. This is a Scythian sword, smaller dagger that a Scythian warrior, after using bow and arrow, would go if the bow breaks or someone is in a close combat. They would switch to some weapon like this. You can have a primary short sword for this type of use, but I think something like a tool that can work as a weapon can be a great result. This is, for example, branch cutting axe. This is great for small environments and hooking and cutting and using against someone with an armor. Like, because it has a smaller point, it can hit and pierce through armor or go into the holes or damage or even like hook my armor and could be really useful, something like this. Or go with a classic axe and a pickaxe combination that can be chopping and also piercing and hooking against an opponent like me, a great weapon in this case. Or something like a go full dwarf and have a shovel as your primary weapon that you can use to dig through the mines and dig through the skulls of your enemies. Continuing with the shields, can have so many different variations of shield sizes, styles. This is, of course, Roman style scutum. We have Byzantine style drop shaped shield. We have a Viking round shield. We have kite shield, and we have small little Caucasian buckler. Each shield is designed for specific reason and specific purpose. Have this idea there is some sort of best weapon, best armor, best shield, but in reality, each fulfills a specific need, specific purpose for a specific time period and culture. So, for example, this large shield scutum, it's great for formations that Romans used to march across the Mediterranean world, holding yourself, protecting yourself. Of course, I have gladius as well, but in this demonstration, Khanjali, shield and sword combination was really important. First, of course, spears were chucked and used, and after dropping spears, then short swords were used. So this specific type of shield might be great in a formation or even a round shield or a square shield. Great for formation when you have a bunch of people protecting you from the sides and using spears and other weapons as attack. But when you're individual fighter, a lot of your opponents can come quickly around you, attack you from behind, and this type of shield might become quickly detrimental, especially if a spear gets stuck into the shield and it becomes much more difficult to wield. So, keeping the protection of the shield, large shield size, and the benefits of mobility. Let me try to, I'm holding so many things at the same time. This type of drop-shaped shield was really popular in the early Middle Ages, especially in the Byzantine area, and out of my ancestors wielded the typical depiction of a knight with a shield and a spear, especially Saint George's icon comes from this, and it's a great combination. The teardrop shape mimics the shadow that human body leaves, a large torso and small legs that can be protected by smaller area. And this type of shield is a great for individual fighting, being on a horseback trying to protect your legs and your body, or on foot trying to hold information and fighting as an individual, because it has enough mobility to protect yourself on independently or stand with shield formations. But again, much more difficult to wield. It's not as comfortable to carry around something large like this. and the teardrop shape is not really comfortable when you're riding a horse. So we might use something like this, a Viking style shield that doesn't tie to your arm like the Byzantine style shield, but you can hold much more in the distance and be actively using. Again, shield walls can be used greatly, but it's much smaller, so you need to actively protect yourself. Again, with a spear, sword, axe, many different weapon combinations can work with such an axe, such a shield, but this is much heavier to wield and more uncomfortable. So if you're an individual fighter, you might go for something much smaller, like a kite shield, but this is not a authentic kite shield. This is more of a decoration. All of them are real, but this one. But my favorite is still small buckler shield, like this. Well, it would go on this hand right here, and bucklers might not look as fancy, and not a lot of body it protects compared to rest of the shields, but when you're holding it in a distance and actively using it to protect from a weapon that your opponent is using, it can be much more beneficial. You can actually use it as a weapon. A lot of cultures, not just Caucasians, use small bucklers, but they specifically used it for duels. That's another important point. It's not a great weapon for a war where massive arrows are flying, a lot of people, and also weapons and spears and attacks are coming from many different directions. When you're fighting someone in front of you with a similar weapon that you are trained to avoid, block, and protect, this is a great weapon, especially for its size, for its being light, and for it being strong. But as an individual going into battle, this isn't the weapon I would choose. I would choose something close to this or this. So each shield has its own benefits and drawbacks, and it's important to know which benefits are beneficial to your situation and which drawbacks are not deadly to you. So think through it. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching, and please comment down below if you have any suggestions, ideas, and if you want a tour of the museum or anything interesting about world building, fantasy, or mythology you'd like me to cover. Again, thank you to my Patreon supporters, and please support the channel to grow in these difficult times against the YouTube algorithm. Thank you and take care.